Part 1. The Obsession Begins. I first heard Robert Johnson's songs like everyone else, playing on a scratchy old record in a dim bar, the haunting twang of his guitar echoing through the haze of smoke. There was something in his voice, something that lingered, that seemed to scrape the surface of something far darker than music. When I finally got my hands on an original recording, an idea I couldn't shake took root in my mind. What if Johnson's songs held a message? Maybe, hidden in the grooves was a secret that could explain the curse that shadowed him even after death. So I took his recordings and transferred them to magnetic tape, and with a little DIY spirit and a deep-seated fascination with the occult, I did what no one had dared to do before. I played Robert Johnson backward. What I heard was unsettling, to say the least. Low whispers hid beneath his voice, words that barely registered as human. Snatches of phrases, broken sentences that seemed to call out, to warn, to pull. In one passage, his voice warbled out what sounded like, "Meet me, cross, the road." My skin prickled as I listened, but I couldn't stop. And I knew that if I wanted answers, I'd need to go to where his legend began, the Mississippi Delta. Part 2, In Search of the Past. My first stop was Hazelhurst, Mississippi, where Johnson was born. The place hadn't changed much over the decades, a town lost in time. I found an old woman named Eliza, rumored to be a distant cousin of Johnson's. She was reluctant to speak at first, eyes wary, but the mention of his name seemed to stir something within her, a combination of pride and fear. "Oh, Robert," she muttered, half to herself. "That boy had too much fire in him. You know, he used to disappear for days, come back with that look in his eyes, like he'd seen things no human should see." Eliza claimed Johnson's family tried everything to stop him from playing music. Prayer meetings, exorcisms, even locking him in the cellar. "But the devil's music was in his blood," she whispered, her voice dropping to a tremor. "You can't keep that kind of fire locked up without it burning everything down." She told me something strange, something that hadn't shown up in the biographies or documentaries. "Robert used to bring back dirt," she said, eyes fixed on some memory far beyond our conversation. "Dirt from places no one wanted to go. From the Crossroads. He'd scatter it around his room and mumble to himself, saying he was keeping them out. But I swear I saw shadows moving around him, whispering in that devil's tongue." Part 3. A Meeting with Reverend Clay. Eliza pointed me toward an old reverend named Clay, a man who claimed to have known Robert back in his youth. When I met him, he was hunched and weathered, his eyes carrying the weight of things he seemed reluctant to say. "Robert Johnson," he rasped. "He had the devil's mark on him, no doubt about it. I tried to save him, you know, but some folks are past saving." The Reverend claimed Johnson had shown up at his door late one night, shaking, half-drunk, and rambling about a deal gone wrong. He kept saying it was too late, that the devil had his claws in him. Told me he'd seen the man in black lurking in the shadows, waiting for his time to come. Clay's voice softened as he recalled Robert's final days. He begged me to perform a last rites prayer, but the way he spoke, the way he looked at me, I knew it was already over. There was nothing left in him but that music and something darker. When I asked if Johnson ever revealed what he'd seen at the Crossroads, Reverend Clay's face went pale. He didn't have to. One night he handed me a scrap of paper with a strange drawing on it. Looked like a twisted figure, a man with a hound's head. Told me he'd seen it there, standing beside the man in black. The Reverend shifted uncomfortably, then added, "That thing, it had its eyes set on him, and it followed him like a shadow." He told me, "Preacher, when I sing, it sings with me." "And now? Now you say you're playing his music backward?" He shook his head, muttering, "Boy, that's how it starts. The devil finds his way in when you start looking for him." Part 4. The Keeper of the Curse. The more people I spoke to, the more I realized that Robert's story wasn't just his own. It was woven into the fabric of the Delta itself. At a dusty old record store in Clarksdale, I met an eccentric old man named Cletus who claimed he was the keeper of Robert's curse. He was a collector of sorts, filling his shop with anything that hinted at the occult. Robert's songs were his confession, he told me, leaning in close. Most folks think it's just music, but if you listen real close, especially backward, you'll hear his plea. He was trying to warn us, see? Warn us that he let something loose. Cletus pulled out a worn journal filled with notes and sketches, apparently his record of the strange occurrences tied to Johnson's music. Every year, People come here to hear his songs, to feel that thrill, but they don't know the cost. I've seen it with my own eyes. One time, a musician came through, wanted to channel Robert's spirit, he said. Well, he left this place shaking, said he saw shadows dancing on the walls and a voice whispering his name. When I asked if he believed Johnson's music truly held the devil's mark, he grinned, a flash of something wild in his eyes. Believe? Son, I know it. You hear that hum at the end of his recordings? That's the sound of hell itself, creeping through the tape. Part 5, The Revelation.
As I continued my investigation, I noticed a change in myself. Johnson's music seemed to cling to me, sticking in my mind like a dark tune I couldn't shake. At night, I'd hear faint whispers in my apartment, like a guitar strumming from another room. My dreams grew darker, shadows lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. One night, I decided to play the tape backward again. As the song warped and twisted, Robert's voice seemed to come alive, more raw, more desperate. And then I heard it, a voice beneath his. A low, guttural murmur that sent chills through me. It sounded like a warning not meant for him, but for me. Turn back, he's coming. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was tapping into something I shouldn't, that I was reopening a door Johnson had tried to close. I felt the curse wrapping around me, as if the devil himself were lurking in those old recordings, waiting for his next victim.
Part 6, The Devil's Truth.
I returned to Eliza one last time, hoping she might shed light on my experiences, but when she opened her door, her face fell.
It started, hasn't it? He's already got his hooks in you.
She took me to her back room where she'd kept a small box filled with mementos. Inside was a crude drawing almost identical to the one Reverend Clay described. An inhuman figure with a hound's head, a twisted grin spread across its face.
Robert drew this himself. He told me it would follow anyone who tried to uncover his secret. Said it was the keeper of the curse.
I knew then that I'd gone too far. The music, the backwards recordings, the whispers, it was all part of a trap, a dark enchantment meant to keep Robert's story buried. I left Eliza's house that day, vowing never to play his music again, never to speak of what I'd found.
Epilogue, Echoes in the Dark.
I tried to move on, but the curse has a way of finding you. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear it. The faint echo of Johnson's voice, humming through the night like a shadow I can't shake. His songs call to me, a siren's tune that promises answers but only leads to darkness. Some nights, if I listen closely, I hear that low murmur, that familiar hum. And I wonder if I too have become part of his story, another victim of the devil's bargain. The curse of Robert Johnson, bound to his music and the secrets he left behind, echoes on, and I wonder if it will ever let me go.
You think it's just a song? Try playing it backwards. See what secrets Jimmy left in there for those with ears to hear.
From his early days as a session guitarist, Jimmy Page didn't just play music, he crafted spells in sound. By the time Led Zeppelin emerged in 1968, Page was already a notorious figure, whispered about in London's underground music scene for his occult fascination. He had an eerie reputation. Musicians claimed he would vanish for days, only to reappear with new riffs, strange and haunting. Stairway to Heaven, Led Zeppelin's magnum opus, became legendary not just for its musical brilliance, but for the myths it spawned. The song was said to contain hidden messages, hidden intentions. The moment Stairway hit the airwaves in 1971, rumors spread. Fans claimed it was more than a song, it was a bridge between this world and another. Years later, an old friend recalled a cryptic conversation Page had shared. "Music isn't just sound, it's a door," he said, fingers tracing the lines of a tattered notebook filled with Crowley's symbols. "Play it right, and you might open it." Page's connection to the occult wasn't just talk. In the early 70s, he purchased Boleskine House, the former residence of Aleister Crowley, an infamous occultist known for his dark rituals and attempts to commune with otherworldly entities. Situated on the shores of Loch Ness, the property was rumored to be cursed. Locals claimed Crowley had performed rituals to summon demons, but left them incomplete, allowing dark forces to linger in the house. Page was captivated by Boleskine, seeing it as an extension of his music. He rarely invited others to the house, and even fewer dared to stay overnight. But those who did told stories of hearing faint guitar melodies drifting through the halls when Page wasn't playing.
Jimmy, what exactly are you trying to hear?
One roadie, brave enough to venture into Boleskine, recalled a chilling night when Page led him through the halls, murmuring about frequencies beyond human range.
Jimmy, what exactly are you trying to hear?
Page replied with a knowing smirk.
Not here. Reach.
As Led Zeppelin's fame grew, so did the legend of Stairway to Heaven. In the mid-1970s, rumors circulated about a hidden message embedded in the track. Fans believed that when played backward, the song contained cryptic lines that hinted at dark themes and secret messages. The term backmasking, reversing audio to reveal hidden words, began to circulate, and Page's reputation added fuel to the fire.
In 1982, a friend gave me a cassette tape, a rare recording of Stairway to Heaven rumored to contain messages that shouldn't exist. Intrigued, I took the tape into the studio late one night, ready to test the myth. As I reversed the audio, I heard something strange, faint but unmistakable. Here's to my sweet Satan.
Shaken, he called his friend, who claimed he'd met Page once at a bar in London. I asked him about it, the backmasking rumors, the friend said. He just looked at me and said, "Some messages only make sense when you hear them in reverse." Then he laughed, like he'd told a private joke. Mark played the tape again, the message even clearer this time. When he shared his discovery, it became a phenomenon. Evangelical groups, rock fans, and skeptics alike began dissecting every Led Zeppelin track, convinced that Page had left an encoded roadmap to something far darker. Part 4, The Price of Fame. Robert Plant, Zeppelin's lead singer, often distanced himself from Page's occult leanings, but he couldn't deny the effect it had on the band's image. After Stairway to Heaven reached global fame, Plant reportedly confronted Page, his voice a mix of frustration and fear. "Jimmy, do you realize what they're saying about us?" Plant demanded during a recording session. "They'll say what they want, Robert," Page replied coolly, tuning his guitar. "We didn't just make a song, we made something timeless." "You really believe that?" Plant shot back, unsettled by Page's tone. Page didn't answer, but he didn't need to. As the guitarist's obsession grew, so did the eerie coincidences around the band. Robert Plant suffered a near-fatal car accident in 1975, and his young son tragically passed away a year later. Some began whispering about a curse, a toll to be paid for the band's meteoric rise. Even after Led Zeppelin split following drummer John Bonham's untimely death in 1980, Page's occult interests continued to loom over him like a shadow. Friends noticed that he became more reclusive, more cryptic. Once a visitor to his home heard Stairway to Heaven playing softly on an old tape, only to realize it was playing in reverse. When he confronted Page about it, the guitarist merely raised an eyebrow and said, "Sometimes truth hides in the echo." Part 5, The Legend Lives On. Today, Page is still alive, and his legacy remains as powerful as ever. But the myths around him have only grown. Young fans and audio enthusiasts continue to reverse Stairway to Heaven, analyzing each note for hidden meanings. Some claim to hear phrases that weren't even audible on the original recordings, and a few say they've heard Page himself, his voice low, as if whispering from beyond. In recent years, an old friend of Page's, who remains anonymous, spoke about a final conversation they'd had over a pint in London. Jimmy looked at me, dead serious, and said, "Music is like a spell. You bind it to the earth, but it wants to go somewhere else. Sometimes, it drags you along." As he sipped his drink, the friend asked Page if he regretted anything. Page gave a slow, knowing smile. "You don't bargain with the devil expecting an easy ride. You just make sure the music's worth it." To this day, Page's words echo in the minds of those who hear Stairway to Heaven. The mystery lingers, weaving its way through generations who wonder if perhaps within those haunting notes, Jimmy Page left behind more than just a song. Maybe he left a piece of his soul, captured forever in a melody that still plays on. Chapter 6, The Forgotten Tapes. A month after the Stairway to Heaven backmasking rumors had reached a fever pitch, Mark, the audio engineer who'd discovered the eerie message, received a call from an old friend. This friend claimed to have something that would rewrite everything people thought they knew about Jimmy Page. The two met in a dimly lit pub in Soho. Mark's friend handed over a plain, unmarked cassette tape, its case scratched and aged. "Found it in an estate sale," the friend whispered, his eyes darting nervously around the bar. It was in a box marked page, Boleskine. Listen to it alone, and for God's sake, don't play it backwards. Curiosity gnawing at him, Mark took the cassette to his studio that night. He hesitated, staring at the tape player, the words "don't play it backwards" echoing in his mind. Against his better judgment, he hit play, listening as a disjointed melody filled the room. There was something off about it, as if the notes were mismatched, forced together in a twisted harmony. Unable to resist, he reversed the tape. Suddenly, Jimmy Page's voice, dark and distorted, filled the room. It wasn't a song, it was a conversation. Mark could just make out Page's voice, speaking in a low tone to someone else, though the other voice was unintelligible. Then, Page's words became disturbingly clear. The music binds. The price was steep, but she lives in the notes now. Forever. Mark's heart pounded. Who was she? Was it a person? A spirit? Before he could ponder further, a chilling noise, the sound of heavy breathing, filled the room, followed by a whisper. "Play the Stairway. She'll show you." Just as Mark reached to stop the tape, the breathing escalated, growing louder and louder until it filled the studio, drowning out all other sounds. Then silence. Mark froze, his hand hovering over the stop button, his mind racing. Did Page know he'd been heard? Had he somehow left a message for someone? Someone beyond the realm of the living? In the quiet that followed, Mark barely noticed his phone lighting up with a message. It was from an unknown number reading simply Boleskine. "Midnight. Come alone." It was a humid summer night in 1961, and the bright lights of New York's Greenwich Village flickered like a beacon for lost souls. Bob Dylan, then a little-known folk singer, was desperate for a breakthrough. A quiet storm of ambition and dissatisfaction brewed in him. He knew he had talent, but he also knew something was missing. He needed something more. On the advice of an old blues guitarist, he decided to venture to the Crossroads, a place where many legends had claimed to have struck their own deals with the devil. The Crossroads in Mississippi, where Robert Johnson had supposedly sold his soul for his extraordinary guitar skills, whispered to him in his dreams. Dylan, ever the iconoclast, took the myth seriously. He needed something raw, something that would resonate with millions of hearts. In a world that was on the verge of change, Dylan needed his music to be the voice of revolution, and to do that, he needed power, more than what any human could summon alone. It was at the Crossroads, alone under the cold stars, where Bob Dylan made his fateful bargain. The devil appeared before him, not as a horned figure, but as a well-dressed man, suave and polished. "What do you want, young man?" the devil asked, his voice a smooth velvet that seemed to slip past Dylan's defenses. Dylan, desperate, mumbled, "I want to be more than I am. I want to shape the world with my words. I want to be the greatest." "It's a simple request," the devil replied, his smile never reaching his eyes. "But greatness comes with a price." Dylan, in his hunger, nodded, not realizing what he was agreeing to. He extended his hand, and the deal was sealed in the cold night air. Dylan's rise to fame was meteoric. By 1963, he was already the voice of a generation. Songs like "Blowin' in the Wind" and "The Times They Are A-Changin'" became anthems for civil rights and social change. But as Dylan's music became more iconic, so did the strange, inexplicable events surrounding him. He found himself surrounded by a sense of foreboding, as though he were constantly being watched. His lyrics, cryptic and filled with allegories, felt as if they were speaking to something beyond human comprehension. He began to experience vivid dreams, where he could hear music, a haunting, otherworldly tune that no one else could hear. It was the devil's tune. Late one night, after a particularly intense recording session, Dylan sat alone in the studio. His fingers hovered over the keys of a piano, and something compelled him to play. As his hands danced across the ivories, an eerie, otherworldly melody emerged, one that didn't feel like his own. It was then that he realized the truth. The music was no longer just his. The devil had not only given him greatness, but he had also taken something from him in return: his soul. By the mid-1960s, Dylan's success was unquestionable, but the darkness that hovered around him was undeniable as well. In the midst of his fame, he suffered a terrifying accident in 1966, an accident that would change the course of his life forever. One late night after a grueling tour, Dylan's motorcycle skidded off the road in a mysterious crash, leaving him badly injured. He was rushed to the hospital, and many feared he wouldn't survive. During the days that followed, Dylan reported strange, vivid hallucinations. A figure dressed in black, with eyes that seemed to glimmer like coals, appeared at the foot of his bed. The figure spoke, and its voice sounded like the crackling of fire. "You made a deal, boy. You've taken the gift, but you will owe me." "I don't understand," Dylan whispered, his voice trembling. "I didn't know what I was doing." The figure smiled, an unsettling grin. "You still don't, but you will." Dylan awoke from the hallucination, drenched in sweat. The figure was gone, but the sense of dread remained. In the late 1960s, Dylan began to publicly distance himself from the folk movement. His sudden shift towards electric music, epitomized by his infamous 1965 performance at the Newport Folk Festival, shocked his fans. What they didn't know was that it wasn't just artistic freedom that drove his decision. It was the devil's influence. One night, as Dylan sat alone in a darkened room after a particularly grueling show, the devil appeared again, this time in the flesh. The air seemed to grow thick with tension, and the lights flickered as the man in black entered the room. "You've strayed from your roots, Bob," the devil said, his voice velvet smooth and cold. "I gave you the power to change the world, but I didn't give you freedom." Dylan, growing more paranoid by the minute, responded sharply, "I never asked for this. I only wanted to make music that meant something." "That's the problem," the devil replied. "You wanted to change the world, but you never asked what the world would do to you." The conversation turned darker, and Dylan's world began to unravel. He realized that the music he had made, the revolution he had ignited, was all part of a larger design, a design that the devil had orchestrated. By the early 1970s, Dylan's music had transformed. Albums like Blood on the Tracks and Desire were filled with haunting, cryptic lyrics, and they were met with both adoration and confusion. Fans and critics alike tried to decode the meaning behind Dylan's words, but few understood the depths of darkness woven into them. Then, in 1975, during a late-night recording session for Desire, Dylan began playing a melody that felt strangely familiar, as though it had been embedded in his subconscious. As he recorded the song, the room seemed to grow cold, and his mind became clouded. The next day, Dylan listened to the recording and was shocked to hear something that sounded like a whisper embedded in the background of the track. When played backward, the whispers became clear. "The devil's mark is on you. He owns you now." Dylan froze. He had heard the whispers before, but this time they were undeniable. His pact with the devil had manifested in ways he could no longer ignore. Chapter 6. The Final Price. In the years that followed, Dylan continued to release music, each album more enigmatic than the last. But as the years passed, it became evident that the toll of his pact was slowly consuming him. Friends who had worked with Dylan began to notice a change in him. He seemed more distant, more withdrawn, and less human with each passing year. One night, a former bandmate and close friend sat with Dylan in a bar. "Bob, what happened to you?" the friend asked, his voice tinged with concern. "You've changed." Dylan looked at him, his eyes hollow. "You don't get it, do you?" he replied, his voice low. "The music, it's a curse. The devil gave me the world, but he's taking it all back." Just then, Dylan's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. When he picked it up, the voice on the other end was cold, familiar, and unmistakable. "It's time, Bob," the voice said. "You've enjoyed your time, but the devil always collects." Dylan looked at his friend one last time before hanging up. He knew in that moment that the end was near. As Dylan stood up and walked toward the door, a faint whisper followed him just out of earshot. The devil's voice, like a distant echo, taunted him one last time. "Remember, Bob, you owe me everything."